Welcome to the Local Marketing Source Weekly Update, brought to you by localmarketingsource.com.
This week's Local Marketing Update is brought to you by Scott Gallagher. Scott is the co-founder of Local Marketing Source and has become the recognized expert in providing online marketing services to local businesses. Follow Scott on Twitter at ScottGallagher5 and on Facebook.com/ScottPGallagher.
Hey, well, good afternoon, everyone. Scott Gallagher here with Local Marketing Source, bringing you our weekly local marketing industry update. Now, next week's LMS member call is going to be next Wednesday, and that is Wednesday. That's going to be the 1st of April on April Fools. And no, there's no joke. We are going to have it. But we may have some April Fools. I'm now just recognizing it's going to be some fun. Might actually be my first member call on April Fools. In any event, this week we've got a few different things to talk about. If you were in the portal anytime this week, you noticed that there was some discussion about different items. We're trying to improve ourselves and satisfy the needs of our students. And so I'll be talking about some of that student stuff. And in there, what do we have? Well, Nick Carlson and George B has shared some insights, so I'm going to address every one of their points. And next, we're going to move on to some YEXT POWERLISTING scoring and what that is all about and how that can help you improve your SEO strategy. Some further discussion on FTC findings. There's some challenges that are going on in the world for that. I want to talk a little bit more about this mobile algorithm update that is coming in less than a month. It's a big one. And finally, we're going to talk about Google's push to get more local businesses online and improve their data. Right. So on that note, I will see if there's any questions before we start, and there isn't, and we're good to go here, folks. All right. So first off, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of this. I'm just labeling it student stuff. And do we have Nick? Yeah, we've got Nick Carlson on the line. And he provided 3 points. Number 1 being best online marketing strategy for a franchise. Best strategies for SEO for an account with multiple locations. And number 3, how can I tell if my client's investment in Yelp is paying off? All right, for the first 2, this is something Nick's dealing with. Nick's dealing with, I believe there's 12 locations with this account. And I can understand some of the intrepidation and the Nick when you're dealing with something of that large as opposed to direct, and the SEO strategies that really go along with that. And I just want to emphasize that each location ultimately is like a new customer. There's really not a lot of leverage that you can get from duplicating from one client to the other. You've got to create the same amount of profiles, exposure, citations. And at least on the website, which only represents about 20% of the weight, we discussed having location pages instead of having the location on the Contact Us page. So there's really not a lot different in regards to the strategy to deal with multiple locations. The best strategies for SEO, when you say deal with an account with multiple locations, again, there could be 10 different strategies that we can use to expose our business. But we really relate and fall back on the 3 pillars. And implementing a review acquisition system. We just rolled out a new review acquisition system yesterday for a client. We're testing it internally, and maybe I'll take a moment to show you guys how that works. Well, actually, why not? You know what? I'll post a quick little 90-second video in the portal about what that addition to the review, but the new content is going to have that. Finally, before I address number 3, just to get to number 2 and 1, a lot of LMS content is theory based. Some of it is definitely executable based, but we are looking to get more of that. I firmly believe that theory is very, very important because it helps teach a man how to fish as opposed to just giving that person a fish and the directions. And I feel like it's the theory that's allowed me to expand and build my business as opposed to be just working for somebody. But on that note, there is some new content that is coming out that is going to address specifically this strategy. And albeit, even though from my perspective, I feel like that multiple locations is really nothing different, I am going to have some content that addresses some of those particular concerns, such as the bulk uploader, how to manage and utilize a bulk uploader, and how to properly, naming conventions, for example. What are some strategies on naming conventions for each location, and whatnot. Now, number 3, how can I tell if my client's investment in Yelp is paying off? Well, first off, my expertise lie in organic channels, not paid channels. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't read about or learn and I'm not educated on paid channels, nor does it mean that I don't recommend that for my clients or do it for my own business. So I do. Now, what I'm assuming here is what we're talking about is your client is investing into some advertising on Yelp. Well, hopefully that advertising sends them to a landing page. And with that landing page and Google Analytics, you can determine the traffic that comes to that landing page from your paid ad. From that landing page, you're going to have a call to action. Well, you can measure that call to action utilizing Google Analytics conversion tools, or if it's just an opt-in, to identify and pull out some opt-in numbers. So 1, traffic. 2, with Google Analytics, you can determine sources. 3, you can determine conversion by knowing how many people come and how many people actually opt in or take the call to action. And once that call to action, depending on the call to action and the channel that it goes down, you can then determine, okay, who ultimately buys, and therefore you can associate the revenue back, or say the revenue back to the expense of Yelp. That's the best way to determine if it's really paying off, if you're getting some money from advertising on Yelp. Now, on the other side of it, I'd really like to find some local businesses that can prove and show that their ROI with Yelp is worthy. I'm not convinced that it is. I don't have any qualms about recommending a client to spend money on Facebook or Google, but I don't recommend Yelp. All right, now George, he says, for these updates. Do we have George on the line here? No, we don't. But George says, less theory from Scott on weekly calls and more practical real-world examples of challenges local agencies face and how the challenges can be overcome. As long as they are current, while local marketing source 3 pillars are stable, the techniques and tactics and tools that support them are ever changing. I want the weekly calls to be a part of the LMS content that is currently up to date. Whew. George, well, again, we're talking about execution and theory. I get that, and I wouldn't disagree with you. Now, our objective at Local Marketing Source inevitably is to do what can we provide to help people be successful? It's as simple as that. I mean, we're not going to cannibalize ourselves into a place that, well, no, we're not going to do that. We don't believe in that, and we don't. If it works and it helps people, we're there to do it. And so, to have less theory and more practical, real-world examples on the calls, okay, I can absorb that and grasp that. Now, what I do need from people is because, for example, I'm going through my operations right now. I've got several thousand different folders, and there's different things that we've focused in on, and there's a lot of knowledge and experience that I have that it's practically impossible on a weekly basis for me to know what specifically my audience is ultimately looking for. In terms of practical real world examples, are we looking to, how do we remove duplicate listings? Heck, I can get in and screen share and go through that particular process. Whether it's setting up website and the plugins that are going for it, how do you configure, it comes down to what detail do I get to in terms of practicality and what is most important. We feel like the majority of the content exists, but I know that on a day-to-day basis things come up that you just kind of go, I don't know. Well, what I need, George, is in order to deliver more practical real-world examples, that's driven by the questions. And you're more than welcome to post questions into the Facebook group during the week that I will address. I've spent an hour before with a student on calls before with screen sharing and trying to get into specific client information if necessary. So we can definitely get that. Now with the 3 pillars, they say they're stable, but the techniques and the tactics and tools that support them are ever changing. I disagree with you. When you say techniques and tactics that support the 3 pillars, no, I don't feel like that those change. I don't think that they've changed ever since the internet was formed. Whether we go back 20, 30, 40 years, some of those practices are relatively the same, because let's take a look at those real quickly here. When we look at citations, the second pillar of citations, these are web references. And to get a citation, a web reference, there's 1,001 different websites that are out there to be able to get and go after. But really, at the end of the day, the real answer is the ones that have the most value are the ones where the audience resides. So in a local community, to have a citation on the local newspaper is a pretty big deal, man. If it's the biggest newspaper in that local community, chances are that community is reading that newspaper. And chances are more people in that community are reading that source than any other source that you could possibly find on the internet that's collaborative. Well, dude, to get exposure in the local newspaper is a technique and a tactic that has been used for decades for businesses to get exposure. It just happens to be the best one on the internet. Guess what? It was also one of the better ones in the old school days too. So the strategies that were really effective in the old school days are the ones that are working today. And the algorithms are consistently moving more and more towards that. So when I talk about mobile websites and the algorithm that's going to be launched in 4 weeks, mark my words, man, write it down. This is a recording and this is going out in public. And I'm going on the record making claims as to what we're going to see in this update. And I'm confident that we're going to see a lot. I'm going to be right. So, when we look at profiles now and the techniques and tactics with particular profiles, we have a best practices. Well, the best practices are pretty normal. Pretty standard. Like, what's the best practice for a description? All right, well, utilize as many characters as you possibly can. That's kind of common sense. That, we don't want to talk for the sake of talking, but we want to say as much as we can with the least amount of words as possible. That's marketing. Okay, so that that technique to write a description on a profile is pretty standard. Well, some SEO people are going to say, well, keyword stuff, and well, no. What are your keywords? Your keywords are your core competencies. If you're a chiropractor, and chiropractic are pretty two big keywords. Those are your core terms when you break it up. So by default, a good description is inevitably going to have the keywords in it anyhow. If you're a good marketer, identifying the services that are provided or the products and the benefits that go along with those services and the modifiers, pediatric chiropractor and regenerative medicine MD, those are the modifiers. So even when we start to look at the techniques and tactics of the second pillar now, profiles, again, it's relatively, those can't change. Now, what do change are the tools. And tools are always going to change. And I've been teaching this now. I'm in my 6th year. And if there's one thing I've learned is people rely way too much on tools. I feel like that the problem with tools is just a very linear approach. Somebody gets into a tool and says, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this and do this, but not fully understand some of the reasoning behind it all. And when you can understand the reasoning and the objective, hence the theory, then you can determine what parts of a tool and what tools are best for you. I have a hard time coming into the community of local marketing source and talking about tools, because next year somebody's going to develop something that's going to adhere to my objective a little bit better. So the tool is not the end all be all. The tools really mean nothing, in my opinion. I use very little tools. What I use tools for is management, not actual execution, to get the job done. The one tool that we do utilize that's highly relevant to help get the job done is Bright Local. I talk about them quite a bit. And so perhaps we can get in there and talk a little bit more about Bright Local. But I'm not too sure, what tools you're referring to. Other than that, some terminology on tools does change. With Google, well, that's inevitable. That's my job to share with you guys as quickly as possible as to what the changes are and how those changes do come. One thing I do know, George, and I do appreciate you sharing this, is with changes such as that, I do talk of some theory, and I do want to get into more screen sharing and actual video work. I've got a nice whiteboard here, and during the week, I want to pull that stuff up and actually show it. I know GoToWebinar and this live streaming of video is relatively new. We tried it a year ago, and it just wasn't suitable. But I think we can handle that now. So I hope that helps, George. Now I want to get into some of the discussions here. YEXT has got a thing called a power listing score. And just like Bright Local, not Bright Local, my bad. It's Moz Local. It used to be Get Listed. But just like, Moz Local and Get Listed had is, you can get a score and, an exposure score. And there's a lot of different tools out there that you can put in. And, Bright Local, when you run the report, you can get a Moz authority and a domain authority. And it's just, these are all numbers. And again, this is talking about particular tools here. I don't put a lot of trust into those tools. I don't really need, I'm at a state that I don't want to get if I'm getting a number to give an exposure, it's a means to show a customer that there's opportunities for improvement. But that number is irrelevant. And one thing, for example, is YEXT, and Mike Blumenthal, pretty big in the industry, is just announcing, with this tool here, he goes, WTF, what's going on? He says, back in October, 7-8 months ago, this particular client had a score of 37% error rate. He made changes on a monthly basis, updated 15 listings, and just kept, he determined all the different listings. And now the score is giving a 61% error rate, despite improving the NAP. His rankings in Google have improved significantly, but YEXT is saying, you've screwed stuff up more, and you got to do more work. Well, if it wasn't for Mike's intuition and his artistic ability as a marketer, he would look at that score and get frantic and get frustrated and start to go and make some changes that were not in alignment with his plan. But he's a marketer and he knows what it takes. And therefore, in his post, he's just saying, hey, I know these numbers are showing me that's wrong, but I'm not the one that's wrong here. It's these tools. It's YEXT. And, YEXT has got a particular algorithm that's built into it. We don't know the trust and the authenticity of them. They are a business for profit. And what goes into a lot of these algorithms and tools? Well, you take it for what it's worth, man. I don't put a lot of weight on tools. What was I watching? I was watching something but one of the first hackers in the early 80s, and utilizing BBC boards and whatnot, how they were, they hacked into the feds here in America and a lot of other federal agencies, and the FBI showed up, and at that point in time, it took 2 years before any charges were laid because there were no laws. And especially in the last 5 years, we've seen a lot of changes with the government, how the government is really getting their hands into this internet thing. And, we talk about the discussions of net neutrality and whatnot. There's a lot of navigation going on in the government, and there's a lot of mistakes that are being made. On an international front by international governments, everything from, the Chinese government from blocking Google to the European governments and, suing Google for antitrust decisions and whatnot. And a lot of these lawmakers just aren't yet fully comprehending, the implications of some of their decisions. And the only way that that's really going to work itself out is trial and error, and that's what we're going through. And all industries tend to go through that. And so recently, the FTC has found that they contradicted themselves on an antitrust decision, and this was actually in the United States. It was in regards to paywall. And paywalls, I mean, we're just starting to see some of this because these companies are going to be managing, the monetization of all of this. But what it comes down to is that the FTC allowed Google to make some changes, and now in a lot of searches, 100% of the content above the fold is monetized. In other words, 0 aspects of organic. And does this make Google evil that they're only giving us results that they're making money on? I mean, well, they're protecting their interests. And, the FTC, well, what do they really have involved in to say, well, what interests are for what? So, I just wanted to share. It's not really that important to know the details of this particular finding contradiction, but we're just seeing more and more examples of this, how lawmakers are not necessarily getting everything right. All right, so the mobile-friendly algorithm. For those that don't know, Google updates their algorithm about 500 times a year. Last year, they had 900 updates. That's over 2 updates a day. Some of their biggest updates, the Penguin updates and the Panda updates, influence between 4 and 12% of all queries. Most updates on a regular basis affect less than 1%. So to affect 12% of queries was their biggest update. Well, this mobile update that's coming, and it's going to be released on April 21st, over the course of 7 days. I don't know if that's 7 days leading up to the 21st or 7 days after or somewhere in between. So we've got about a 2-week window that we're going to be watching with some of these updates. Google has also said that it's possible that these updates are going to affect up to 40% of websites. That could make this the biggest update ever. Okay, let's talk market share for a moment. Google reports between a 65 and an 85% market share rate, depending on who you're talking to. ComScore says Google sits at a 65% market share. That's the lowest side of it. That's still 2/3% market share. That's on that's on a national front in the United States. On an international front, it pushes above 80%. But now across the board internationally, there's no data on this, but the industry is claiming and figures that Google holds about 85% of the market share for local searches. Well, that's where we work, right, guys? So if 85% are mobile, 60% of new business that local businesses are getting come from mobile searches. And this is the biggest update that's in relation to mobile sites. You better treat this seriously. It comes down to your website. Now, I know that's only about 20% of the way to the ranking, but the fact is a website's relatively important. It could possibly be a higher weighted rank if your site is not mobile friendly. There are best practices to make your site mobile friendly. We have some of the content available inside the LMS portal. You can just do a quick little Google search, even if you're only hitting. Basically, the biggest thing for mobile sites to be mobile friendly, let's say there's 10 factors that we would look at on that checklist. Of those 10 factors, if you did the top 2, your site could be considered mobile friendly. Inside Google Webmaster Tools, there's also you put in a website and then Google will tell you how friendly your website is and then tell you what needs to be updated. Make sure you satisfy their needs. It would only make sense to, right? But those 2 biggest things are responsiveness. So you want a responsive website and you want a website that loads fast. Okay, a responsive website, well, it makes sense. Doesn't matter what size the viewer is. It doesn't matter if it's a laptop, desktop, 27-inch, 21-inch, 7-inch cell phone, or a 3-inch display on a phone. The website's going to resize itself and make sure text sizes and all that are appropriate so it works out properly. So you want a responsive website. It's easily done in WordPress. It's your theme that drives that. So you just need a mobile responsive theme. to improve that. Other things are for speed, loading of speed. If you're using any CMS, do not have any plugins that are not being used. Get rid of all of that. Make sure that your database is optimized. There's plugins you can get to optimize your database, whatnot. There's also another plugin called a W3. What is it called? W3 Cache, I think. Hold on, I'll get you the real name here. W3 Total Cache. There's different caching tools that are out there. Essentially, this just caches information on your site, so when somebody comes and loads it up, it loads a lot faster. Don't use WP Super Cache. Use the W3 Total Cache. I used the other one in the past, but again, that will make your site speed up. Other things are like images. Make sure your images are optimized. Don't load, a 400 kilobyte image unless you're a photographer and trying to give high resolution. So follow those things there, and your site is going to be 80% of the way for mobile responsiveness and satisfy the needs of the search engines. All right, and that comes to the conclusion of my update this week.
Well, thanks for watching the Local Marketing Industry Update. We've got these things coming out every single week, so if you liked with what you heard, just click the button right above me right here to subscribe to our channel. If you'd like to get a little bit more, right over here, go check out localmarketingsource.com. We've got free reports that you can grab. You can even register for a free marketing course to get in and see the portal. Or just go ahead and follow us on some of the social channels. We'll be around. Until next time.